Are You Nuts? A Tom and Scott Mystery, Book 7. Author Mark Richard Zubro. St. Martin's Press, New York. Eric Aust, narrator. Chapter 15. I wanted to stop in my classroom. While unlocking the door, I caught a glimpse of something out of place down the hall. I thought we'd put an end to problems in and around my classroom. I hurried forward. In a recess in the wall at the turn of the next hall, I found a male teenager languidly propping up a row of lockers. I'd seen his elbow and foot sticking into the hallway. "Taking a break?" I asked. "Nah. Mrs. Jenkins, the principal, told me I had to sit here and watch for people. Nobody told me different. So I've been here since after school. It's boring." "Did you see anybody?" "Not much after all the kids left. A few custodians were around. Some women went into one of the rooms. I think it might have been yours." "Do you know who it was?" "No." "Can you describe her?" He tossed his hair out of his eyes and rubbed at the acne on his chin. "A big woman. I've seen her around once or twice." "Lydia? Young or old?" "Older. Kind of silvery hair. Maybe she works in the district office. I don't know." "Carolyn?" I thanked him and went to check my room. Everything seemed to be in place. I walked to the administrative offices. Wisps of humidity crawled over and around me. The school had been bearable today. Mavis smiled at me and said Carolyn was on the phone. I told her I would wait. 15 minutes later, I was shown into Carolyn's office. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I'm okay. I'll stop at the hospital on my way home." "I heard they're going to keep Jason overnight, but only as a precaution. He should be fine." I sat in a leather chair on the opposite side of her desk. "I just had an odd talk with Lydia Marquez," I began. "She said you were the one trying to get Meg fired." "Not true. Lydia's either making it up or the rumor mill has gone into overdrive." I guess I believed her. "I also wanted to ask you about the election. When they set up the union, I think what went on then had something to do with the murders." "What on earth put that idea into your head?" "As I've talked to people, they keep mentioning enmities that go back a long time. There seems to be a lot of focus on that. It was 10 years before my time, and I've never gotten the whole story." "Well, there were actually 4 rounds of voting," she explained. "The first was to vote to have a union. The second was on the contract. The third to go on strike. And the fourth to throw Beatrix out and put in Agnes Davis as president." "Those must have been bitter times." "Oh, they were. Nothing anybody could do would lower the rhetoric on either side. Several people have said you tried to work out a compromise." She leaned back in her maroon leather high-back swivel chair. They are very kind to remember. I always try to get people to work together. But you were the head of one faction, the one that wanted to have no union. How did that work?" "You must have been disappointed." "After I lost? I was fed up enough to go into administration. This was not a pleasant place to work at that time. A lot of people quit in the years immediately after the election. Things would be far more bitter here if all those people had stayed on. I figured I could have more real influence on education if I got into the administrative end." "Including in the recent school board election?" "I beg your pardon. I understand you were trying to influence the outcome. I think I know how you could be on Lydia's side. The board is so out of control now, you're less than a figurehead. You must be terrifically frustrated. Did you figure if they got in, they'd have to lean on you to learn what to do as a school board? You could get your rightful place back. Of course, if the current school board found out about that now, you could be in some hot water." "Everyone has a right to support who they want in an election. And everyone in a public position takes the consequences of their public acts. Or Belutha and Lydia trying to work that knowledge of your involvement to their own ends? Were they threatening you?" "Don't be absurd." "It's not absurd. Everybody's been running around with secrets. Seth says you came to him. You say he came to you. Were you trying to involve yourself in the union election too?" What good would the endorsement of the superintendent do in a union election? I don't know. Maybe you've been harboring resentments ever since your faction lost all those years ago. Why would I care about back then? I know people in their 90s who can recall wrongs they felt as children as if they had happened yesterday. I've done my best to cooperate with the Union. You said Jerome and Seth wanted to wreck the Union. Maybe you were willing to help in that, tearing it down. The Union was no friend to the teachers in this district. We'd all have been better off if there had been no Union. Who did you tell that to? Who wanted your support that badly? Who would be nuts enough to believe it would make a difference? Who would buy into that madness? Jerome. She rose to her feet. She pointed at the door. Get out. Her voice was soft but icy cold. I remained seated. When she realized I wasn't moving, she said, I can still get you fired. What were you doing in my room this afternoon? She sat down abruptly. One of the kids saw you. Edwina must have ordered him to keep watch. After the kids were caught, she never told him not to. What were you doing there? I can go into any room in the school. Let's not be absurd. What purpose would you have to go into my room? Perhaps I was simply looking for you. It's far easier just to call down on the intercom. I said, no, I'm not the problem here. It looks more like you've got the problem. Who would have access to all the schools and who was around at all the correct times for the murders? You've been involved with all these people, then and now. You've got secrets you're holding back, but I bet if we got all those people together, we'd get a picture of a superintendent losing her grip. Carolyn swiveled her chair so she could look out on her portion of the potholed parking lot. Below the window was a low shelf jammed with papers and a variety of boxes. She spoke without turning around. Education these days is not worth the effort. It takes to make it work right. Something always goes wrong. There's always another parent who isn't connecting with reality, or a lunatic board member, or a pissed-off teacher to contend with. It's as if there is a world full of Beatrix Zuris. There really doesn't seem to be much point in trying to do a good job. Take you, for example. You're no prize. There's always something about you. An issue, a problem. I was a better teacher than you ever were. Rambling aimlessly wasn't Carolyn's style. I've seen more difficulties and dealt with more problems than you could imagine. I've had issues that you could never handle. I've had to be tough and strong. You'd never be able to stick it out long enough. You've got to be able to handle pressure in this job. I was the one who wanted to get Meg fired. I couldn't have her around. That much hassle is too much. I made a mistake. You left traces of blood. She interrupted. No, you silly twit. My mistake was taking all of this seriously. It's the same problem you have. You believe all this stuff makes a difference. It doesn't. You know, no matter how much you fight, make sarcastic comments, try to be kind to people, convince them, force them, everything eventually goes to hell. Is that what happened with Jerome? She completely ignored my question. She continued. The problem is believing so strongly that you have to act before your frustration level hits a point of no return. I was supposed to meet with Jerome that night. I had found Meg's purse under a coat rack next to the gym. I was planning to return it. When I walked into the library, I heard them arguing and stopped to listen. The things he said were so irrational. My own anger finally got the best of me. When Meg ran out of the room after she hit him, I hurried to Jerome's side. I barely remember what I did. I know I grabbed one of the books, and I know hitting him felt good. I realized I'd used a different book than Meg. I put the other book in your room. I knew I had to do something with it. Behind your books was the first place I thought of. You and Meg are friends. I hoped they'd suspect you both. Why'd you move the body? I was afraid I'd be seen from the hallway. I didn't think Meg would be back. My mind seemed incredibly clear, but I was acting, not thinking. I was there when she came back. I don't know what stopped me from killing her. Belutha saw me coming out of the library that night. She bided her time, probably planning the best use she could put the information to. The night she was killed, I was already supposed to meet with her. I was afraid of what she knew. I called her from a payphone. I didn't want the police to ever be able to trace a call between my home or the school here. Belutha wanted to use her knowledge to get me to bend to her will. That was her leverage. That's why she didn't tell the police about who she saw. She was going to blackmail me, and anybody else she could. She believed so strongly, and she was going to make her wish come true by making us do as she wanted. Just like Jerome. People have an amazing habit of doing what they want, not what you want. You can try a million things, but when they don't work out, the frustration is too much. I don't believe any hassle is worth much anymore. She turned around. She held a gun in an unsteady hand. I jumped to my feet. Are you nuts? If you kill me, everyone will know it was you. Mavis and the rest of the office staff know I'm here. That's not my problem. She raised the gun to her head. Fairness is for shit. The instant it took to realize what she was doing and then to shout and leap across the desk to try to stop her was too long. The gun made a horrific boom. The secretaries, the paramedics, the cops, the detectives, the school board members, the administrators, all flooded into the district office. Early on, I latched onto Frank Murphy and sat with him in the empty school board meeting room. He and Baxter, Dickinson, and Leonard Roswald spoke with me for about an hour. Frank's main comment was, I don't get this stuff about supporting the election. What kind of help is one loon on your side? I said, I'm not sure I think people believe they are building their coalition one person at a time. It takes a while, but it can be very effective. Eventually, you can switch from incremental gains to an avalanche. At least, that's what they hope. Dickinson said, what use is a frenzied fight over the presidency of this union? Who on earth would care? Frank said, obviously these people did. Until Todd showed up, Frank remained with me, and we talked mostly about kids we'd known in the past, which ones were in jail, who was on probation, who was dealing drugs, who had turned his life around. Based on the information I gave, the cops talked to all the possible people Carolyn might have been involved with. The inferences I'd drawn turned out to be the plausible ones. Much later, a careful inspection of her vehicle would yield traces of Jerome's blood. No gloves were ever found. She must have had the sense to throw them out after handling the encyclopedia. The traces were microscopic, but that DNA stuff is true. I stayed in the office for around 3 hours, mostly getting depressed. I tried calling home, but Scott wasn't in. I called Meg and told her the news. She barely seemed relieved. She told me she was just frightened. She wasn't going to fight about her job. She told me she was just going to resign and take her pension. All the fight seemed to be taken out of her. I said as many encouraging things as I could and promised to stop by tomorrow. I wanted to get home and talk to Scott, but I decided to make a quick trip to the hospital. I walked into Jason Brewer's hospital room. Scott was standing near his bed. Another teenager was sitting on the bed next to Jason. He quickly withdrew his hand from Jason's as I walked in. I approached him. You okay? I asked Jason. Yeah. They're just keeping me here for observation overnight. Something about my electrolytes aren't in order. He pointed to the other teenager, a skinny kid with nasty acne. This is Stanley. He's a junior like me. We're friends. Stanley gave a nervous laugh. I heard you solved the murder. Jason said it was on the radio earlier that Mrs. Blackburn did it. Did she really? I nodded and gave them a brief outline. I wanted to get home. When I finished, Scott said, Are you okay? This has been a little busier Friday than I thought it would be. We got ready to leave. Thanks for coming, Jason said. Stanley nodded, and his voice gave a teenage squeak as he said, Thanks for being who you are. You really help. He cleared his throat. I mean, sometimes it's hard on kids like us. You make a big difference. As we turned to walk out the door, I saw Jason reaching his hand out for Stanley's. In the hallway, Scott said, I'd go through all this again. That's what makes the difference. That gay kids know they're okay. I smiled and hugged him. I would never change anything, he said. I love you, and having you next to me to go through life with, Scott whispered in my ear. Let's get married. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.